Okay, but it's not giving me that option now. It looks like my assistant might not have set this up right. So, okay, it's not giving me that option. Okay, maybe. Well, we're live, just not live on our proper link. So that's all right. We'll roll with it, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, then that's cool. It's good to be here, right? We go with it.
We go with it. Yes, it's good to be here.
So I have the beautiful, and I don't know how to pronounce your name correctly, your last name, but this is the beautiful Anne Papayoti?
Papayoti, you got it. Yes.
I did it? Yeah. All right. So welcome. I'm so excited to have you here with us. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
Good. And I do love the message of the book you've written and the gift of shift.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's a gift in shifting our perspectives, and it can change how we experience life. We can't change our circumstances always, but we can change how we experience it.
And, what a great message, because, in light of what's going on in the world today, but in addition, like I was just talking to a friend, I don't know, sometime last week, and he's been through some really traumatic childhood things. And, at some point, whatever our traumas are, we have to look at those as opportunities. Otherwise, we become a victim, right?
That's right. Absolutely. When we can find some kind of meaning and create purpose from our pain in life, then we can completely turn it around and use it for the greater good. And it's not just about us. Ultimately, when we truly go back and look at it, I like to have people look back at life and connect the dots and understand where those turning points and crossroads were in their life. What's the pain and what are they still holding on to, so they can learn to release that and then understand why they're where they're at now. Then they can plan and map their future. But it takes that stillness, that quietness, that reflection on life, because a lot of people just keep going. Many of us were taught, just get up and go. You fall down on the bike, you get up and you keep going. You don't stop and address the pain necessarily. So when it's a great emotional trauma in life, if we don't address the pain and we don't learn how to grieve it and acknowledge it and validate it for what it was, and truly do the work of grief, because that's what I find is missing for a lot of people, the work of grief, so that we can really move through it, let it go, learn from it, let it become a scar, and use that scar as a reminder of our strength, so that we can move forward in life, help others, and use it for greater good. Then we're finding a purpose with it. Then we can use it as strength and really something greater. So
isn't that true? So I know I just jumped right in, so I will back up and introduce who you are. But that always that reminds me, and the best analogy I have, and I'm sure there's something better, but is like if you're walking around with rocks in your shoes, if you just say, oh, I'm just going to push through it and it's okay, my feet are bloody. Well, but it takes 2 seconds to take your shoes off, kick out the rocks, right? And so in real life, like that is analogous to that grief. If we just try to pass through it, we think, well, I got over it. No, you didn't. It's still there. It's still in your shoes, right? So
that's right.
So go ahead.
No, I was just saying, and passing over, introducing me is fine. Just to say, I mean, it's a great segue actually, because, unlike many people, I actually had a happy childhood. I didn't have emotional trauma in my childhood. And I know you say it doesn't matter who your daddy is, right? I love that about you because of your story. I think that's so cool. But I had a happy childhood and grew up in, a modest lifestyle back home in Birmingham, Alabama. My dad worked for the phone company. My mom taught piano at home, and my mom was someone who just really valued education, but she didn't have the privilege of going to college or university until my brother and I were born. And then she put my brother, once he was in kindergarten, I was a toddler, she dragged me to junior college with her. And God bless those professors that allowed her to do that and allowed me to sit there and eat I didn't eat peanut butter, I ate butter and jelly sandwiches. Oh my God. But anyway, I did. And I sat in those classes, and maybe it was a good thing I was a quiet child, but this just to lead into what we're talking about reflecting. I was still, I was quiet. I'd listened and I learned and I valued all of that. And what I didn't know then was that was who I was, and it was who I would become, is someone who listens and is quiet and reflects. Now, that's become what I do as a career, but I had to go through my own life losses, transitions, and ultimately triumphs, and learn to do that for myself. And that was the hard part, and recognize those innate skills to help others. And back in high school, I was the go-to girl for friends with problems. People said, you could have your own Dear Annie column. And one of the yearbooks
do you think the secret was just listening? Because I've noticed that, right, that a lot of people just don't listen.
Yeah.
Just slow down enough to take in what somebody else is saying. Yeah.
Exactly. And I didn't realize that, but actually one of the yearbooks described me as a good listener. You know how they give out the, the best dressed.
Yeah.
I would have been the best listener apparently, but I had no idea how important or even how innate that skill set was for me until I went back and looked at my life and realized, this is who I truly am, who I was and who I am. And yes, I believe listening is imperative. And I think all healing begins with kindness. And I think self-healing begins with self-compassion, and it starts with listening to ourselves. And one of the stories in the book, The Gift of Shift, is called The Gift of Buoyancy. And I talk about my dad teaching me how to swim, but he insisted I learn how to float first. And I was like, no, I wanted to swim, teach me how to swim so I can go to the deep end and go off the diving platforms. And he's like, no, you're gonna have to learn how to float, because if you learn how to swim without learning how to float, you're going to wear out and you could drown. You're going to learn how to float, to rest, to be still. You'll have some intentional movement. You're going to get some perspective. You're going to know where you're at, and you can choose where you want to swim, how far, and then you're going to know how to float again and rest a while. And I had no idea how important that life lesson would be.
That's a huge life lesson. And just even visualizing that, right? How much that makes sense just in life, right?
Exactly. And that's that stillness. So I think when anyone's been through emotional trauma, rather than just keep swimming till they wear out and, and get pulled under, whether it's into negative thinking or giving up on themselves or starting to whatever it is, because some people they start overachieving to mask and hide what's happened, or they underperform and underachieve, and, because they find they're not worth it. People go one of two ways. So either way, they'll just stop and reflect and float a while. So this is my message, really. Just stop and float and find that stillness and listen to yourself. Trust yourself. Remember who you are. And you can, when you're floating, you can hear your heartbeat in your ear, and you hear your breathing. Stop and breathe and hear your heartbeat and reconnect to you. And then you'll have a new perspective. I just saw you breathe. That was beautiful. I just saw you.
I should do that, right? Do it right now.
And then you can see options and choices. Like, do you want to swim to the first pier? Or you know what? Maybe that's not the right pier for you. Maybe it's this one or that one. because when I went through my own losses and transitions in life, which started in my early 20s, and then there was a pattern of them because I just kept swimming rather than stopping and floating. So I realized that this was really the strategy I needed in my life. I just swam to the first boat, and it wasn't the right boat. And that landed me in an abusive marriage. And then because of that, each choice has a consequence until you learn the lesson you need to learn and make better choices.
So I was going to say, playing the devil's advocate here is somebody saying, oh, well, listen, lady, you had this Leave It to Beaver childhood. So who are you to say?
Oh, exactly. And I think that.
And you are somebody to say, so please share.
No, that Leave It to Beaver childhood. I mean, I do remember the first time I felt like a failure or felt like I was not good enough in 7th grade was with a math teacher of all things. That was because the world made sense to me in numbers. And I literally, when I first started university, I was going to major in business and finance because I'm very kind of analytical and anal, one side of me, and the other side is, has developed into this other like scholarly study of emotions and everything. But however, Leave It to Beaver kind of childhood maybe set me up for naivety, right? And so I thought, if the golden rule, you treat people well, they'll treat you well. And I also always knew that I was supposed to help people. I was always in that realm. I'm the listener, I'm the go-to girl, I'm that. And when I wrote in my childhood book, what are you going to be when you grow up? It was a resounding, recurring theme of teacher, nurse, teacher, stewardess fell in there at some point. I don't know how I knew what one was. We always went camping for vacation. I didn't fly on an airplane until I was in my 20s. So, but I must have seen that somewhere and thought that's cool. I want to travel the world. Well, listen, everything I put came to, and I always wanted to be a mom. Everything I wanted came to pass in my life, just didn't come in the expected ways.
Yeah.
And I had to be open to seeing that later rather than grieving what didn't come in the way I expected, in the Pollyanna way and the Leave It to Beaver way. None of that came in those ways. However, what happened was when I was 20, a friend betrayed me. And that blew me away when my best friend betrayed me with the guy I thought I was going to marry. She knew my heart. And even though he and I broke up, it was for the purpose of coming back together. And she knew that, and she purposely went for him. And it was the way it happened. It wasn't, it felt intentional and cruel and purposeful. And it was devastating. And I lost the two people closest to me, and I lost them to one another. And I lost myself in my pain and in my grief, and I made it about me. Now, the learning from that, but it took a long time to learn it, was that whatever anyone says or does is about them. It's not about you, but I made it about me, and that's on me. So I was like, what's wrong with me? Was I not a good enough friend? Was I not a good enough girlfriend? Was I not worthy of either of these two people's love and affection and loyalty? And it broke me. And I lost who I was. And I started now, had I gone through this betrayal, now I started betraying myself. And in betraying myself, I went from I wasn't an overachiever, but I was someone for whom I had a spirit of excellence in everything I did. And I started failing out of school, and I gained a lot of weight, and I started not showing up for my own life. I'll put it that way. I stopped showing up for life. And it took about a year to start I was functioning. I mean, I started functioning, and I lost the weight because I was going, and then I had a job, and I finished school at a different university, and all those things. It looked like nobody thought I was stuck in that, but I was stuck in the I'm not good enough mindset. I'm not good enough.
I'm going to say the most powerful words that you said there, that affect. affect our lives so deeply is not believing you're worthy and not thinking you're good enough, right?
That's it. And so because I was stuck in that mindset, even though to the outside world, I was in this mask of achievement and success and moving forward, graduated school, had a good job, went into Europe, did a study abroad, took a job with the airline, thought I want to do more of that. I want to see more. Hey, there's another thing from childhood. I said I wanted to be a stewardess. Well, here I go, my little 3-inch heels and my little dog leash suitcase back in the day. I'm checking the boxes, right? Here I go. Well, I run into somebody, I meet a guy, and he happens, this is 3 years after university. He knows me, the friend, and the boyfriend. He knew all of us back in the day. And he said all the things I needed to hear. So that's the key word, needed. I was still needy. So I hate the line from Jerry Maguire that says, you complete me, because I needed to be completed. I didn't know I still needed that, but there was still a hole in me. Even though I had continued to swim, here was this boat waiting that said, you're awesome. They weren't. You are. And you know what? Come on into my boat. And it felt like what? It felt like love. And I didn't feel lovable. And I got in that boat. Well, 3 months into
You were
America,
vulnerable at that point, right?
Yeah.
Because like you said, you weren't whole and complete within yourself. And when we leave that gap open, right, then that allows in these codependent, potentially abusive, all of that into our world.
That's exactly right. So that's the message. Don't look for someone to complete you. Complete yourself. Look for someone to complement you. Build a life together. Don't join someone. All of these are the messages in this. So I ended up in this relationship that turned out he was a narcissist, and narcissistic abuse syndrome is a real thing. They start with idolizing you, and that's how it started. He put me on a pedestal. It felt amazing. But 3 months into the marriage, which we married, it was 1.5 years later, but he told me at one point the best sales job he ever did was getting me to marry him. Yeah, that was big. But it still took me 8 years to get out of the marriage and having 2 children in the marriage. And I lost my first child when he was 2 weeks old. That was a big loss. Second child, I was hospitalized 4 months trying to hold off labor and delivery. Looking back, I know it was all stress because I'm now remarried and we had a child together, and I didn't go into preterm labor. And I was turning 40 during that pregnancy, and my body was set up to, once you've had one preterm labor, you're destined for another. And I beat those odds. And so I know the effect of stress on the body and the mind and how that will ultimately play out. So yes.
There. So what was the turning point? How many years did you go on with that carrying that trauma with you, thinking that you had moved past it? And what's interesting about it is what I think happens for many of us is that once we have that first, I'm not worthy, then it's like a downward spin. And that's why you got stuck there for 8 years, because your self-concept is destroyed. You're not that empowered best version of yourself. It's not easy to just walk.
That's right. It's not easy to walk. Again, built me up and then knocked me down, right? And so then all the messaging that I had already given myself became, like on steroids. And so it was just more and more evidence that, well, I am a failure. I failed here, I'm failing here. And then when my son was born and passed away, it put everything else in perspective. It started with, I'm not even worthy to carry a child. My body can't carry a child. And I didn't see it as stress. I didn't blame him. I blamed me. And I blamed that I still wasn't good enough. But it was a connection to God and messages and feeling, it was a spiritual turning point. and I know you're into this, so I'm going to share this with you.
Yeah, that's why I'm, let's go with that.
Okay, there was a spiritual turning point, but it wasn't but it started with the death of my first son, and literally in the hospital when they did a surgery in the hopes to save his life, but he was born prematurely, and his gut health was in jeopardy. And we had 4 scenarios. The last case scenario was that there wouldn't be nothing they could do, and unfortunately that was the case. But on that day, after the surgeon came and delivered that news, I was out looking out the window waiting for whatever was next in that moment. But it started storming outside. And I remember this, there's another spiritual story I'll tell you in a minute. On the way to the hospital, actually, because they transferred him from one hospital to another for surgery, I could hear this beautiful, angelic, it's the only way I could say it, sound. It was like a choir singing. There were no words. It was just music. And my husband and I were following the ambulance. And I was like looking out the window because it was obviously coming from the sky, from the heavens. And I'm like, can you hear that? And I'm hitting him. He was like, what? And he could not hear it. And it was just so peaceful. And I took it as a message that my son was going to be okay. And I just was like, I was literally joyful. Here's my son being transported for life-saving surgery. And I'm ecstatic because it was so beautiful and amazing. I can't even, I wish everybody could hear it. It was nothing like I've ever experienced. But a couple days later.
It sounds very cool though. I've had some profound experiences like this, so I get it. Yeah, very cool.
But sadly, a couple of days later, when that was not the case and he was not going to make it, and I was looking out the window of the hospital and a storm came up, I had this overwhelming peace that God was crying with me. And that the angelic chorus was that my son was being called home, that his purpose on earth had been served. And while I didn't understand it yet, that I would. And so all I could think was God lost his son as well. And a storm came up on that night. And I was just, okay, I was given a peace. And it got me through the next week, where I had to bury my son and I had to deal with other people's grief. And I had to, the grandparents, firstborn grandchild for my husband's side. And there was just a lot of burden throughout that week. Now I went through my own grief process later, which was not pretty. And I got mad at God and angry at God, but I came back around. But that was the beginning. But the next one was when my second son was born. And I really thought my first son had changed my husband. So I stayed. Again, I stay. And there was peace in our marriage. But my second son was born, and I saw my husband go back to his old ways of abusive language and tactics and humiliation and degradation. And I thought, here I am. But I was starting to do things. I could feel movement. I could feel like my feet getting unstuck. And I could feel that while I had not done this for myself, I'm going to not leave a child in this situation. But I hadn't quite, taken the big steps. I was taking baby steps. My mindset was starting to shift and starting to change. I mean, when my son was 22 months old, he stood between us and said, Mama, Dada bad. And Dada stopped. He was trying to get his dad to stop screaming at me. And it was in that moment that, and I think every thing happens when we're ready, but it happens in a moment of opportunity and there's a decisiveness, and that we step through fear and into courage, and it's a choice. And that's when it happened for me, when my son did that. And I just, in that moment, did it. But I felt an angel lift me. I felt I was being held, and it was beautiful. So this is when this all started to change, and I started having these connections. I started really believing. I mean, I grew up in church. My mom played the piano and the organ in church. I was Southern Baptist, but I started becoming spiritual, and my journey.
ask you a question here?
Yes.
Because, you know, they say that losing a child, I mean, I can only imagine that is literally one of the worst traumas any person can go through. And for somebody that is out there who's maybe experienced a loss or a grief of that magnitude, like what would be the number one thing you would say to them to help them through that?
To create meaning and purpose for their life. It's there. Find it. Find it. It's there. For me, when I had an opportunity, there's an opportunity. You just have to be open to it. I was given an opportunity by one of the neonatologists to come speak to other resident intern pediatricians and neonatologists about my experience at the hospital, which was all about really bedside manner, because the surgeon had none. The one who had to tell me that my son's life, my son was going to pass away. And I found that by sharing his story to give these young doctors a story to remember, because storytelling is so powerful, right? We remember stories and we hold on to them, because they weren't being taught this at the time. They weren't being taught bedside manner. But if they could take a story and they could remember it, and they could remember that I didn't need this surgeon to hold my hand, I didn't need him to cry for me. I knew, and I probably couldn't even relate to how many other families might he have to say the same thing to that day or in his career tomorrow, and he needed to go home and sleep that night. But to add a softener and a compassionate tone, and if they could just remember Jansen's story, how many lives would they touch? And how many, you know, these 60, 70 people that were in this conference room, how many children and families would they touch in their careers? And I was like, that's it. It doesn't matter how long my son lived. It mattered that he mattered. So give meaning to their life. It's not about how short. Find it for yourself. Create meaning for you, for your child. And that's what matters, not the duration of their life.
And so when you say also purpose, like finding your own purpose as well, right?
Yeah, yes. Turn your pain into purpose. Don't let your pain just be pain. You know, pain in life is inevitable, as they say, but suffering is optional. So if we
Yes, the struggle is optional, right?
yeah. I mean, we're gonna hurt. That's kind of that's part of life. There's gonna be hurts and pains,
right.
but we don't, if we get stuck in it, that's why we want to shift out of it. We feel it, acknowledge it, validate it. It hurt, you know, it hurt it was such a depth of pain that there aren't even words in the dictionary to describe it, and the darkness. But I think I would dishonor my child if I stayed there. I felt like I owed it to him to live. When you can see life as a gift, life itself as a gift, then you say, okay, I'm not going to stay in the darkness. I'm going to move towards the light, and I'm going to do whatever it takes. So the purpose is in nothing else, is to get up and live and be grateful for life.
So after this experience, can you speak to, do you think that his soul actually chose to come?
Yes, that's my belief. I do. I believe that his soul chose to come to help me. I believed it was to help his father, and I hope, and I believe it, he touched him for sure, but it didn't change him in the way that I expected. Again, we have to let go of expectations. Right. My life didn't play out as I expected it to. I didn't get to wear the maternity clothes and have that ideal, you know, make all the cute pictures as the pregnant mom with either of my first two pregnancies. I didn't get to decorate my nursery. I didn't, you know, all these things that you expect. And I grieve those losses too. We have to grieve our dreams, the loss of our dreams, but then embrace what is. Don't focus on what we don't have, focus on what we do have. I like to talk about that, you know, the every rose has thorns, right? And our gaze can fix on both the thorny stem and the beautiful blossom, but are we going to, which one do you want to look at? You know, which one do you want to focus on? It's all there. But I just am at a point where I appreciate life and the gift of life, that I'm going to choose, because that's our freedom, is choosing. Choice is ours. We always have choice. And the premise of positive psychology is not to ignore the bad exists, but to focus on the good. And the more we focus on the good in life, because there's good in life too, the more we focus on the good and we look for it, we have to look up, right? And that's what I talk about in the Gift of Charlie Brown, which is the chapter about the loss of my son and grieving, is, and Snoopy says, you got to look up, right? Is that when we're looking down, we can't see the opportunity and the option and the light. So we have to look up. So be willing to look up and you'll see more.
Yeah, that phrase too, it's funny. People don't necessarily make the connection, like, hey, things are looking up, right? Like when we physically, actually physically look up, it literally alters our physiology too.
Yes, it does. Everything, our posture, our peripheral vision is greater. Literally, we see more. Therefore, we see more options. Therefore, we have more choice. Therefore, we have more power in our lives. So, yeah.
That's a great tool. That's a great takeaway, right? Just to remember that one. I always like to look up.
Look up. Just looking up can change everything. Yeah. Yeah.
So I did want to ask you, I know what FOMO is, but what is JOMO?
All right. Yeah. So the gift of JOMO.
The gift of JOMO.
Acronym JOMO, joy of missing out. It's the antithesis to FOMO, fear of missing out. So, you know, it's the same circumstance. Maybe, you know, there's a party and you make a decision. Are you going to go or are you not? Or you can't. You can't go. Let's say you can't go to the party. So are you upset? And it's the fear of missing out because, oh no, you might miss meeting somebody, or you're going to miss a networking opportunity, and you creates anxiety and stress for you because you're missing out. Or is it the joy of missing out because you get to stay home and read a good book, have a reading hangover tomorrow morning, you know, snuggle with your dog, and because you haven't had any good quality time. So it doesn't change the circumstance. Maybe it's all about claiming your viewpoint and your perspective over something. Now, that might be a small example, but when COVID hit, we all faced FOMO or JOMO. Now, maybe in the first weeks of it, people were like, yay, don't have to go to work. I get to stay home. Yeah, work from home is going to feel good for a minute. But who knew we'd be this deep into it, right? And then it's like, oh, we can't go to a restaurant. And then we can't, and it was so much of the can't do's and what was taken away. So a lot of FOMO happened. Other people you could see, especially early on, they said, well, what can I do while I'm stuck at home? People learn to bake. People learn to garden. People learn to, you know, they got closer to their families because they were spending such intimate time.
They learned how to walk outside, right?
How to walk outside, not driving the cars. So every time we lose something, we find something else. Every time we give something up, we gain something else. It's just we have to be open to experiencing it. And so it's a mindset. JOMO's a mindset.
JOMO. I like it.
Yeah, I do too. And I like when
well,
joy is your word.
What?
Joy is your word.
I know. I'm all about the joy. So I like the idea of, you know, just finding the joy in if something isn't the way that you want it. And that is, you know, overall the perspective. I mean, even looking at, you mentioned what happened when everybody had to stay at home. And there's more things like that can be perceived as taking away our freedoms. Yet I actually believe that there's definitely a gift in this. And a lot of people started following their passion and actually did start finding their purpose. And right. So that's a beautiful thing. And I do still have this vision of a utopian society, the potential of that coming to pass with more and more people truly awakening to their soul's purpose. So
absolutely. I think that there's so much good that comes from, we don't always see it in the moment when something quote unquote bad or negative happens. There's always something good to come. And as Snoopy says, we just have to look up to see it. So here we go. If we start looking up, and yes, I mean, look at I know my son applied for law school because he graduated from university during COVID, and he wasn't accepted. Now, while that may be bad for him, but look on the other side, they had a 40% higher applicant rate because there were people who had always wanted to go to law school, but had started jobs, started working. And then they said, but this was what their passion, they'd always wanted to, it was their opportunity to. So it was older applicants going to pursue their passion and their purpose and what they'd always wanted to do. So it'll come back down. So, and he can apply again at some point if he chooses to. But yes,
so a gift in that for him. There's a huge gift in that for him too.
Yeah. There is. He hates school on Zoom. He would have been in school on Zoom. He's working in his undergrad degrees, finance. He's working in finance. The gift for me was he took that gap year. He lived at home with me. He hadn't lived at home in 5 years. His younger brother, benefited because they're 7 years apart and they spent this great quality time together. There's always something amazing that comes from these perceived losses, their gains. But yes, people reconnecting to their passions. Now, because I work with a lot of relationship conflicts, people either got closer or they, but it's not that the pandemic created the tension. It was already there. It's just they had always avoided it. They weren't in the situation to have to deal with it. Now they're facing each other. We got to deal with it. And so that's really what I've seen happen.
So what motivated you? Well, what inspired you to write this book, The Gift of Shift?
So thank you for asking. So my co-author and I, Tracy McDonald, met in a coach training event, and we were both living in Canada at the time, and it was in Miami, and we both escaped winter, and we gravitated to one another, and we started collaborating on some content development and created a workshop of this title, The Gift of Shift, because we just love talking about getting people to be open to different perspectives, because we get stuck in that catabolic place and that dance of victim and conflict. And there's so much more. There's so many more options energetically, and we can change even our mind-body connection when we are willing to kind of do the work and examine it and notice that we have a default that's going to take us when we're stressed to one of those two mindsets, victim or conflict. But then if we'll take responsibility to shift out as soon as we know, as soon as we're aware, starts with awareness and then conscious choice, take responsibility, shift out of victim or conflict, and then tap into sort of our true self and find that heart energy and that love and compassion, either for ourselves or others, to find a new perspective. So she and I had created this workshop around it. And I had always wanted to write a book since I was 17. I knew I would. I just thought it'd be a novel. Well, here.
Your life story has become a novel, right?
Yeah. I maybe one day. I've got little different chapters written in shoeboxes somewhere, but life took me down this different path, and I found, because I'm following my purpose and my calling, and I know that I'm a healer. That's another thing. I got bitten by a poisonous snake, I think, to wake me up too. This is my bad. That's a whole nother thing. But
Yeah, you were sick. Were you hospitalized for several months or something?
no, I think that's why I got so sick. I went to the medical center beside the hospital because my sister-in-law worked there. I was living in Canada, but visiting back home in Alabama. And my brother took me to my sister-in-law's place of work, and they recognized it as a copperhead bite, and they gave me a tetanus shot. And that hurt worse than the snake bite. I didn't see the snake, thank God, or I probably would have done a happy dance and had multiple strikes. But a warning strike is a low dose of venom. Typically, they said, if you have these symptoms, come back within 24 hours, get the anti-venom, blah, blah, blah. I didn't have those symptoms. So everybody thought it was a warning strike, low dose of venom, but it also, they know, can affect different systems differently. And I had a delayed onset, kind of like rabies. So 2 weeks later, I'm in Canada. Nobody associated snake bite. There's no poisonous snakes in Montreal. So, and I'm talking to I started with migraines and headaches, and then neurological symptoms, and then respiratory symptoms, and then cardiovascular symptoms, as poison's designed to do, but nobody attached it back to this.
The connection.
And I got really, really, really sick, and I was dying from the inside out. And it was a slow, painful scenario until a friend had me go see a holistic doctor, an osteopath who recognized what was happening to me, and I got some pain relief. And once I got some pain relief and some symptoms started dissipating, I was able to eventually start rebuilding my muscles and my breathing and anyway. Wow. But I also recognized I had a shamanic awakening type thing where I realized, okay, I'm listening to you. But I used to have recurring nightmares about snakes. I never had that dream since. And I've done a little bit of research, and I realized that some of it was possibly some past life stuff. And I don't want to get too woo-woo here, but I've never
woo-woo.
Okay.
I do this every day, all day.
Okay. Well, the snake's associated.
Open to this.
All right, good. Well, the snake's associated with healing. It's on the medical.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And I've done some studying, and I got really, really in touch with my intuition, and I'm clairsentient. So I feel energy in my hand, and I've just worked on that. And I now couple my intuition with my listening. And I say I listen with my head, my heart, and my mind. And that includes my gut, my intuition, my instinct. But I've accepted the fact that my calling in life is to be a healer, and that I always was. I just I think I got a big awakening with the snake bite as well. But I think I made a deal that no more snakes. It was my biggest fear. Since childhood, it was a huge fear, and I had these horrible recurring nightmares, but I haven't had them since I was bitten. I don't know what that says, but
I have a friend he's 74 years old, and he has had various forms of cancer actually for several years. And the last testing that he did actually shows that now it's bad. And although I do believe there's things and ways for him to potentially heal it, through a very deep, soulful conversation, I asked him, where he thinks he goes from here. And he told me some really beautiful stories. I mean, we literally had a conversation for like 6 hours. And he shared with me all of these wonderful life experiences that he's had. He's been friends with people in Hollywood. He used to run drugs for people in Hollywood.
Oh, wow.
He's a decorated Purple Heart Marine. And the stories went on and on and on. And it was, it kind of gives me chills even right now, because when we were done with the conversation, I think he was at peace with the idea that he would be okay. Like his body's getting older and he would be okay with exiting and, having to start the journey over again with a fresh body.
That is amazing. I love that. I've gotten very comfortable with death. I held my son as he passed. I had the privilege of being with my father as he took his last breath, and my mother. And I don't know a lot of people who can say that. And it's literally a privilege to be with someone when they cross over. And I don't fear death. I see it because I don't see it as the end. And I feel like science and spirituality kind of match on this about energy. When Einstein says, and quantum physicists like him, and I'm never going to argue with anyone like that, when they say energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only changed from one form to another. So if the body dies, there's still energy. Where does it go? Well, religion always taught me that the soul is going to live on, in heaven. So to me, everything, science and religion matched. And I'm like, that's cool. I had a visitation from my dad after he passed. That was so cool. And he came to me and he said, "It's not what we thought." That's all he said. I turned around and walked off. I went,
what does that mean?
Yeah. But it was a beautiful, he was in a beautiful.
That could mean so much.
I know, but I think he was telling me, so keep learning, keep growing, stay open, because I had been a fundamentalist. I was brought up in very fundamentalist beliefs, like, very, it is 1 and 1 is 2. There's no, and I was, so it was, and I was in a process. I had moved to Canada in my 40s, and I had started at a church that was, it was the United Church of Canada. So it was Baptist, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, no, not Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, I believe, combined. And that's what they called United. And I'm married to a Greek Orthodox now. So we had found our kind of middle as far as raising the kids, go to Greek Orthodox for certain things and go to Presbyterian seemed to be sort of middle of the road for me. And, but we found this United Church, but someone gave me a book called, Breaking Free from Fundamentalism or something. And I had started reading it, but I was struggling with it. And when my dad said that, I'm like, okay, that's my message. keep searching, keep asking, keep questioning. And it's really opened my mindset to a lot of things. And so now I consider myself more spiritual than religious, for sure.
Yeah, it opens it, it unbounds it, right? It releases some of the limitations. And, interestingly enough, I do think that I saw a documentary about this, and I'm not well versed in it, but they were talking about how the Bible, it's been edited, and we don't really know for sure what may have been in the original, but this documentary was claiming that the Bible actually did talk about reincarnation, and that it was edited out. So I find that interesting. Heck, I don't know. I've had some interesting experiences. I've even flashed back to past lives. Mm-hmm. So I do like to believe that yes, what's the saying again? Our energy is never, what is it? Energy never
destroyed. It's
yeah, it only changes.
And that's, I do too. And I'm so curious, like deja vus. Have you had deja vu experiences?
Sure.
And I remember in first grade going to visit a school because my mom was looking at changing our schools. And I remember I knew exactly where I was going. I knew where I was. It was in a church, in this old church in Birmingham. And I was like, I knew the halls. I knew everything at this. I'd been there before.
Wow.
And anyway, that was my
very
first.
cool.
So, it was very cool. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you're a healer, and I know that you do coaching and you also work with couples. How did you get into that? How did you go down that path?
It started by being first a participant in a support group for my own divorce. And then they asked me to take it over. There was a couple leading this support group. It was at my local church, and they were ready to just, give it over to some fresh eyes, fresh perspective. And I'm not sure why they tapped into me, but they did. And another gentleman who was in the group, and we took it over. This was 25 years ago, and I started leading the support group. I said, I'm not ready. I'm not healed. They're like, you don't have to be ready. You heal as you help others as well. And they just saw something in me for that. So I started that way. And what I recognized was people kept wanting more from me. They wanted one-on-one time. They wanted my guidance. And I resisted. I was resisting that calling. But after I remarried and went through my FOMO JOMO battle as I gave up my 17-year airline career to move to Montreal, I was at home. I'm being a stay-at-home mom. And I had an opportunity to go to a women's center there and volunteer and do some things. They asked me to start leading a support group and offering personal development courses. And there it was again, the same messaging. Would you, people wanted one-on-one time. And so I eventually just stopped resisting and said, okay. So it became a natural thing. It chose me. I didn't choose it naturally. I think I would have stayed at the airline forever had that change not come about for my husband, that I then chose JOMO over FOMO to let go of my career to allow him to advance his.
And so now I'm going to actually bring up I added into I pinned an offer that you have.
Oh, great.
On so you're giving something free to our viewers here. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So I have a little mini course called Soul CPR, because having been a lifeguard and a flight attendant and all, I've been trained in CPR and I've used it a few times. And I recognize that that is one way that I actually help people when I'm working with them is you got to kind of revive your life. And so, and really it's your soul. So when you've lost who you are in a relationship or in a role that you play in life, I want to help you revive that. So there's a video and then a 3-part PDF, a little downloadable workbook that'll take you through that. I'm going to connect.
So they can go to this link to get this free mini course.
That's right.
And before we go though, I want to go back to, and this is also on Amazon, they can find your book as well.
Right.
Is that sharing? I don't know if that's sharing.
Yes, it is. It is.
Okay. I wanted to go back to where people are either, their kind of defaults go to victim or conflict.
Yes.
And I mean, I've seen that so much in my life too. And I don't know what the best way for people to unwire themselves from that, automatic, like, because being the victim only makes them powerless.
Yes. And we can't really unwire from that. That's really that survival mode that's our primitive brain.
Right.
So we can't really unwire from that. It really is about developing self-mastery and awareness so that it's not about not going there. It's about not staying there. So being aware, okay, that I just had a victim thought. I'm not going to hold on to it. I'm going to let it go. So what will I swap it out for? What will serve me better? Because the thought's going to create the feeling. The feeling is then going to drive the action or the inaction. If it's a victim thought, sometimes we get apathetic, we do nothing, we give up. So it's literally, it's not that we can rewire that. It's going to happen. It's just not staying there.
So I'm going to kind of trace back over that because I think that was perfect. That was awesome. So it's just identifying it, right? Being a self-mastery of your own thoughts and recognizing, okay, is this serving me, right? Just asking yourself.
Yes.
And then saying, okay, I don't want to stay here, and what will serve me.
That's right. It's kind of asking yourself, you know, and name it. It helps to name it, you know. I'm angry, I'm frustrated, or I'm humiliated, I'm embarrassed. Okay. I gotcha. I know why I'm embarrassed. I get it.
Okay.
But that's not gonna, you know, like, go ahead and name it, talk to it, and say, and validate it, say I got it. But that's not gonna, I'm not gonna act on it because that's not gonna serve me well. You know, what would I've normally done? You know, if the emotion drove it, if the embarrassment drove it, maybe what would I typically have done? What was the strategy I used to use? Well, maybe I would embarrass them back, or maybe I, whatever.
Blame the other person for that. It's your fault that I feel that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's recognizing, so self-mastery is going to be consciously then recognizing it, own it, claim it, acknowledge it, say, okay, I got it, understand it, and then choosing something different. And that's where we're going into responsibility for our own, how we experience life. So that's it. We're going to go there. We're human. Just don't stay there.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I just, it seems so simple, but it's not always simple if especially if it's something that when people have patterns, right? And we all do, we've had habits, and so to be able to just stop and recognize whatever that habit is, whether it's a victim idea or negative self-talk, or, you know, that feeling of, or even recognizing the feeling of lack of self-worth, that the only one that can make you not feel that is you.
That's
and
right.
And it's free and available to us just by tuning into. I was talking about this with Lisa on my last show, that if you just breathe it into your heart, the feeling of love, it's here. It's already here. You have to allow it in, just like worthiness.
That's it. The power is in us and up to us. So that's where the work comes in. But like any habit, the habit of, we weren't born unworthy, so we developed that as a habit. And so we can get this pattern interrupt habit as well. So and catch it sooner and sooner, these thoughts, and then we just shift them sooner. So that's where the gift comes in. The sooner we shift it, the sooner we're on that other side, feeling better, doing better, better choices, better experiences. So it's just catching it.
Creating better for ourselves. Yeah.
That's unlocking the best life. That's what it's about. The key is, it's our choice. So that's what yeah.
What would you say would be the number one, like out of everything we've talked about, or maybe we missed, is like the number one takeaway you would want people to have?
To reflect on their life. And this is how the book is set up, is that each chapter, after a short story, your story may be different than mine or Tracy's, but the theme you've experienced, I can guarantee you've experienced the theme, whether it's betrayal or courage or hope or grief or being true to yourself. It's then each chapter then has coaching questions. It's so like a guided journal section, and a place for you to write your own story. So the point of that is to give yourself space and time to reflect on your life, so you can remember a time where you tapped into something, some strength or some kind of character trait that helped you get through something. So you can use that now to get through something that you may be facing now that might be a challenge, or to reveal how you may be still stuck in a story in your life, so that you can use this reflection time to help start releasing that and unlocking it, so you can move on through it into your best life.
Beautiful. So what would you say is the best way for people to find you?
So connect with me on my website, skyviewcoaching.com, or any of the social media. Facebook is also Skyview Coaching. Instagram, Twitter will be my name, and no E, Papayoti. And they'll probably need to get that one off.
We have it in the description. So
Yeah.
yeah. Awesome. Well, I totally enjoyed connecting with you, and I'm sure we could talk about more stories for even longer.
Oh, we could. Oh, we could talk about my math teacher.
Well, you know, I used to be a math professor, right?
I know. That's why I know. I love that. I love that. There's so much that we could talk about, more spiritual experiences.
Well, maybe we can do another part a few months from now.
I would love that.
Okay.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you. Blessings.
Likewise.
Have a great day.
You too.